Another thing is, can you study a person and you yourself is not involved in self-reflexivity? Impossible. If you study the person, you really have to understand yourself. You study physics, you don't have to understand yourself. You have to be disinterested in order to understand what the structure out there is. But you study a person, you sometimes will have to use your own experience, your own concerns as a way of understanding. Now, the person you study is the person you respect, right? You emulate, you want to become. So the person is not your friend. The person is a master, maybe a great figure. And so you study the person, and you know you have to use what I called multi-perspective way. It's not linear progression. It's not one structure. It's multi-dimensions. You have to understand the person from many different angles. And also you have to be self-reflective. You know yourself. Another thing, you assume that a person is knowable, right? If the person is mysterious, I mentioned if you go to, if you face the Harvard statue, none of you may have a chance to see it or may choose to see it. If you walk to the left and turn around, there are 3 books. 2 are open, 1's closed. And if this guy is a closed book, like a mysterious book, like the wisdom that is beyond comprehension, then there's no way you can understand, right? So there has to be an open. In other words, the person is willing to be studied. It's open. Now, many people say, you study a dead person, right? The person is dead. So let's say an essay, a treatise, an argument, a biography, if it is done as a way of understanding Confucius, you can treat each one of them, an essay or a biography or treatise or argument, as something you can repeat. If you don't know the argument, for example, Immanuel Kant, his whole argument about autonomous morality. And you can go back and study it again, because he has given you something out there, and you can do it. But now the person is dynamic, is transformative, is open, and yet the person does not give you a way of apprehending that can be easily, of course you can repeat it, that can be easily capture the person by repeating that process. If you look at a person from one angle, the more you do it, the more you enforce that particular angle, the more you only understand the partial. So let's assume a group of people wanted to do it. So they think the best way to do it is to listen to his voices, to see him in situational context, to understand the dynamic process. Also very important, he's a person. He's a human being like us. He can be understood because there's some kind of connection between he as a great personality and all of us with some ability to comprehend. In other words, the person can be analyzed by our rational mind. But not just rational. We have to have some sympathy with the person. Now you have a bunch of statements. Some answers questions, sometimes challenging, sometimes they admit it is mistaken, sometimes they talk about his lamentation, nobody understands him, sometimes he talk about heaven, only heaven understands him, sometimes he's frustrated because the young student died, the best, brilliant student died, and some of the old fool continue to live. All these situations we experience on a daily basis. He also did. And so my sense is that a collection of these statements were deliberately chosen. None of the statement in the Analects is haphazard. None of the statement in the Analects is just casual. But yet it gives you a casualness because of situation, right? And sometimes you get an idea, some are more important than others. I think that's important. We call it hierarchy of values. Some are really essential. Some are occasional, but each one of them is relevant. So one way of understanding this, let's say we understand a great statue, and we have to look at the statue from many angles. So each statement is a flashlight or light source that will shine upon the person. And you have many, but not infinite, not complete. These are suggestive. These are sources, lights that shine upon this person in order to understand the holistic structure of the person. And I mentioned it's not a statue, because the person changes, the person responds to the situation. Now, some people, I think, rightly characterize Confucian ethics as situational ethics. The situation is important. You have to, in other words, you have to exercise your imagination, what a situation is. And if you take each and every statement seriously, each and every statement is already a story. No statement simply a response to a situational question. The story involves the master's relationship to the student, involve appreciation of the student's personality. Zilu, he was very brave and very forthright and not very reflexive. Yan Hui, very young, and actually seemed to follow the master's spirit, almost in total agreement. So the master said, I talked to him, and he didn't respond for a while. He looked pretty foolish or pretty stupid. And yet I examined what he did, I realized he understood everything. So we call it tacit understanding between the master and his son. We have another brilliant student, Zigong, who always asks difficult questions about heaven, about all these other things. The master was very much stimulated by him. One historical account, of course you don't have access to any of the historical accounts. We don't ask you to do a historical analysis. When the master died, normally the mourning ritual lasted for 3 years. But he built a hut near Confucius' dad's place, a burial mound, lived for another 3 years. So he lived for 6 years. This devotion to Confucius. And Confucius said, well, do you think you're as good as Yan Hui, who died at the age of 32 and didn't accomplish anything? We know very little about his family. We don't know anything about his practice of filial piety. He never got a position, so no way for him to be politically relevant. And I said, can we compare? What do you think you can compare with Yan Hui? Zigong knew his master's sense. He said, no, there's no way. I may be able to get 1 point, and he's way ahead of us. Confucius sighed and said, yes, both of us. Not only you, but I. This cannot emulate. Yan Hui is almost like pure